Hi everyone. We've been making our way through a series of videos on Christianity and culture. And today I'd like to focus on culture. Now, culture is a very shaky and elusive term. Even academics have been heavily debating what culture means for a long time. And so there doesn't seem to be any actual consensus as to how we define culture. Nonetheless, I would like to review some of the concepts regarding culture that academics have come up with and see if we can piece together some sort of working definition of culture that will hopefully serve us as we go forward in this video series. Let's get started. One of the more complicated definitions of culture that I'm aware of comes from the interdisciplinary scholar Orlando Patterson. Patterson defines culture as the conjugate product of two reciprocal componential processes. The first process is both dynamic and stable. It is the process of what he says are collectively made, reproduced, and unevenly shared knowledge structures. Presumably, I think what he means by knowledge structures are things such as common societal beliefs, modes of thinking about given subjects like morality, for example, and the weight that a given society might put on things like science and philosophy as disciplines. Patterson says that these structures are informational and meaningful, and that they are self-shaping or self-manifesting, and yet externally represented. These structures provide predictability and continuity within a given group, and they result in the meaningfulness of actions and interactions that we have as we go about our daily lives. The second component is essentially the pragmatic nature of those knowledge structures. As the broader social environment changes, it seems that those knowledge structures are effectively tweaked so as to allow a group to adapt to its changing society, or in the case of a whole society, the changing world. Another concept of culture that I'd like to discuss comes from a study carried out by economist Klaus Desmet and his colleagues. What they did was they examined survey data from 76 countries with the goal of analyzing the relationship between ethnicity and culture. Now, they did this with consideration to things like a survey respondent's demographic and economic dispositions. Their definition of culture is that culture is a vector of traits reflecting norms, values, and attitudes. Now, the results of their study are both very interesting and somewhat confusing. They found that ethnicity is a significant predictor of cultural attitudes. They also found that the share of variation in culture that is explained by ethnicity is relatively insignificant when seen within a singular culture. As a result of this small variation, cultural diversity is not strongly connected with ethnic diversity in a singular cultural frame. Put differently, people's norms, values, and attitudes are predictable to a fair degree when ethnicity is taken into consideration. But ethnicity is still not strong enough to account for fractionalization within a culture. Thus, ethnic fractionalization cannot readily be taken as a proxy for diversity in values, attitudes, and preferences within a given culture. From culture to culture, ethnicity is a big indicator of conflict, but not so much within a culture. I think that this lends itself to the idea that culture, whatever culture is in a broad sense, a very powerful, regulating, and equalizing force. Lentz wrote an article in which she reviewed a number of different important academic concepts of culture in an attempt to show the development of the concept. Her review covers way more than I can cover here in this short video, but there are some important themes that she highlights which I think can be of good use to us. The first thing that Lentz does is reiterate just how messy culture as a concept is, both in terms of the academic debate over the definition of culture and in terms of its conceptual reification in the public square and the way that the average person understands and uses the concept, especially when culture is weaponized and used to purposely cause harm to others. Now, I should point out here that the term harm is itself potentially dangerous, misunderstood, and it's often misused as well. Lentz covers ideas from scholars such as the foundational anthropologist Edward Taylor, who defined culture as an entire complex which constitutes a group's knowledge, morals, beliefs, customs, and even its art. On his view, then, culture is a collective, societal thing. Along with Taylor, Lentz discusses the well-established ideas of Talcott Parsons. I will very roughly try and summarize his argument here. Parsons argued that culture is very semiotic. The behavioral patterns that we see in a given society are, in a sense, symbols which express that society's tradition of values, beliefs, and ideas. As well, she looks at work from other important early 20th century scholars like Bronislaw Malinowski, who saw culture as a functional ensemble of instruments and practices which people create to serve their respective needs. She looked at the work of R. A. Radcliffe Brown, who thought of culture as something of an ideological superstructure that held society together. Importantly, Lentz highlights the development of the concept of culture as laid out by scholars like Franz Boas and Ruth Benedict, both of whom argue that cultures form not just internally, but also as a result of interactions between societies. Thus, on their view, culture is porous. Now, I certainly haven't carried out an exhaustive review of the concept of culture here. One could beat this topic to death and then some trying to cover everything that's been said about culture. But in light of what I have covered, I think that we have enough to create a working definition of culture that will serve to guide us as we discuss culture in future videos. Each of the concepts of culture discussed so far involves ideas like values, morals, beliefs, knowledge structures, and behaviors. These ideas will constitute our definition of culture. To add to that, a group's culture also seems to be both dynamic and stable. This is so in the sense that culture is porous, and it allows for the inclusions of ideas, beliefs, morals, and so forth from other groups. Yet at the same time, it is also slow-changing and perhaps quite resistant to augmentation in its overall shape and structure, because culture, at least on some views, is probably also very isolated to a single society. So there you have it. In the next video, I will briefly introduce the concept of a subculture, and then I'm going to frame this overall discussion in terms of a conflict between groups. Until then, please take care, and God bless.